Am I live? I'm gonna get the 30-second countdown. Hi. Awkward. Okay, I didn't get the 30-second countdown. So after the awkward beginning, let's try to edit that in the later versions of it. Hi, I'm Yoni from Holster Mountain Tours, and welcome to the Lone Oak Tree. I'm going to tell you the story about the Lone Oak Tree. You can see the title of the story here. You can see the actual tree right over there. The reason I'm at the Lone Oak Tree is for a couple of things. Number one, it's a great story. And what you know about me is I love great stories, but it's also really close to my house. And that might sound like something superficial, but as we all know, school is back in session. School has started once again. And so I've got the kids home and I can't take them traveling like I was able to for the past couple of weeks, just going around to different places. I wanted to keep it a little bit closer to home. Speaking of school being back in session, I have the wonderful luxury of having all of my kids going to school every day. Well, except for Fridays. One of my kids has school on Friday. The other two do not. But I know that there are other people that your kids are not necessarily, people who are watching this, your kids are not necessarily in school every single day. They're staggering the schooling for ages 4th grade and up. So I know that you don't necessarily have your kids in school every day. So you might want to do something with your kids on those days that they're not in school, whether if you want to go with your kids or just send them on a group trip. I would be more than happy to supplement their education in school with a wonderful tour. We can go to places that they're learning about in school. We can go to places that they're not learning about in school and you want them to know about. I can take kids who are, like I said, not in school for that particular day, or there are some parents that don't feel so comfortable sending their kids back to school yet. They feel that classrooms are a little bit too crowded, and I get that. I totally understand. If you'll notice, there's nobody around me. It is completely and totally socially distanced from everyone in the world at this point. So if your kid came on a tour with me, or if you came on a tour with me with your kid, I would be more than happy to maintain this kind of social distance. This is the kind of tour that I like giving. Beautiful, temperate. I'm here in the shade. I'm so happy that I'm here in the shade. For those of you not in Israel, I'll be a little bit of a weatherman for just a moment here. There has been a crazy heat wave. Not crazy, but there has been a heat wave for the past couple of days, and it's been weird. Even here in the Gush, where you normally have things hot and dry, here there's actually been some humidity, and it's weird, and I didn't like it. I'm not a big fan of humidity. That's one of the things I don't miss about New York. There are plenty of things I miss about living in New York. I love New York and almost everything about it, but the humidity in the summertime, not so much. I'm okay with leaving that behind. Anyways, but that's not what I'm talking about today. Today I'm talking about the Lone Oak Tree. And as it said in the description of today's video is going to be the story of home. And if we're talking about home in the broader sense, home in the broader sense, obviously, is the land of Israel. So, that being said, here's today's trivia question. On what date was the state of Israel declared? On what date was the state of Israel established? You might think this is an easy one, but I'm throwing you a little bit of a curveball, and I'll explain why in just a little bit. So let's talk about this oak tree. Hold on. What do we have? I didn't see. Oh, here he is. Okay, thank you for sharing, Daniela. Let everyone know today's setup was a little bit wacky. I apologize about that. Okay, so here we go. The oak tree. The oak tree is a common oak. There's different kinds of oak trees here in Israel. This one is called the common oak. However, if I'm going to use a terrible pun, this is actually quite an uncommon oak tree. Rim shot. The reason it's uncommon is because this oak tree is anywhere between 600 to 700 years old. It's a really, really old tree. And the reason that makes it uncommon is because when the Turkish government was in charge here, one of their many plans that they were in charge here for about 400 years or so. One of their many plans that they had in motion was a railroad that would connect Cairo to Damascus, or Cairo to Turkey. I forget exactly where in Turkey. But the idea was to have a railroad going through the entire area that we today call the land of Israel, or the state of Israel, and also including Lebanon and Syria, all along the Mediterranean coast. In order to build that railroad, they needed a lot of wood, and so they set about cutting down whatever trees they needed to supply the wood for that railroad. The only trees that they didn't cut down were trees that they felt were sacred for one reason or another. This is one of those trees. This tree, I don't know exactly the reasons. I apologize. If you do know the reasons, please let me know in the comments. But this tree was actually a sacred tree that they decided to leave and not cut down. And it's been here for, as I said, either 600 or 700 years, something like that. Let's split the difference. 650 years. This tree has been standing here. And it's just been a nice tree, very pretty tree. And in 1927, I'm blanking on the name of it. In 1927, there was a group of Yemenite Jews that came here, and they established a settlement. And I'm trying to remember the name of it, and it's based on a verse in Genesis. I'm blanking on it. Again, if you remember it, let me know in the comments. This you don't have to give a thumbs up for. If you, the trivia question of when Israel was established, on what date was Israel established, that you just give a thumbs up so you don't spoil it for anybody else. But if you know the name of the community that was established here in 1927 by the Yemenite Jews, let me know, because I actually forgot it. But it was established over here. The history of Gush Etzion in general, if you want to give it a negative name for it, it's up until its most modern incarnation, which I'll talk about at the end of the video. It was a series of bad timing, of decisions of bad timing. Because, as I said, the first time people settled here was in 1927. Shortly after that, in 1929, there were widespread riots throughout the entire British Mandate of Palestine. The Arabs were rioting, and primarily against Jews, and things were no different over here. The Yemenite community abandoned the settlement, and they fled. As a matter of fact, there were a lot of Arabs from the nearby town of Beit Umar that ended up taking in a lot of those farmers and protecting them. Unfortunately, the apple has fallen very far from the tree, and people in Beit Umar are not so helpful to Jews today. But in 1929, they're actually quite helpful to Jews that needed it. Then, in 1935, there was an organization called El Hahar that was headed by a guy named Shmuel Holtzman, and he got money together to build a kibbutz here. That kibbutz was called, they decided to name the kibbutz Kfar Etzion. Now, in the old movie that they had in Kfar Etzion, talking about the history of the place, they would just say that they decided to name the project after Holtzman, calling it Gush Etzion, leaving most viewers confused. Like, if they called it Kfar Etzion, how is that named after Holtzman? Etzion and Holtzman, other than having a ts sound in it, don't really sound all that similar. But one word is in Hebrew, the other word is in English. Not in English, excuse me, Holtzman is in German. So in order to unlock the key, you have to know German to understand why Etzion would be named after Holtzman. Because in German, and again, if you know this, please write it in the comments. It's not an official trivia question. But in German, Migdal Eder, thank you, Natan. Thank you very much. Migdal Eder is the name of the settlement that was here in 1927. I feel it's so frustrating when a little tidbit of information like that it flies out of my head, and it's very, very frustrating. Anyways, thank you. Migdal Eder was the name of the community here in 1927. That it was evacuated in 1929. Now, getting back to Holtzman, if you speak German, it all makes sense, because Holz in Hebrew, Holz in German means wood. Eitz in Hebrew is wood. So they decided to name the place Etzion for Holtzman. Eitz and Holz are the same thing. So that's where it comes from. Unfortunately, the old movie left that middle step out. Okay. Thank you to Google in that case. In any case, so Shmuel Holtzman, he bankrolls this project to build a kibbutz here in 1935. But again, it's bad timing. Again, there's no way to know that, but but it's bad timing. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear this, but there's a couple of Apache helicopters. No, sorry, Black Hawk helicopters flying overhead. It's actually really cool. We don't hear it. So the microphone noise cancellation is just that good. But there were a couple of really loud helicopters just flying overhead. Anyways, so Shmuel Holtzman, he bankrolls this Kfar Etzion to be built, this kibbutz to be built. And again, it's bad timing, which he had no way of knowing it was bad timing. But it turns out, in hindsight, it was bad timing because it was founded in 1935. And then in 1936, in 1936, there were once again riots, Arab riots, throughout the entire Mandate of Palestine. This time, the riots were primarily aimed against the British. And I have to say primarily because as long as they were rioting, they figured, why not attack Jews also? So there were plenty of Jews, unfortunately, that were killed in the riots of 1936 to 1939. But those riots once again caused this area to be abandoned. Then in 1943, JNF raised some money to reestablish this place. Why was it so important, by the way? Why is it so important to have a Jewish territorial foothold in this area? Well, if you look at a map, we are pretty much equidistant between Jerusalem in that direction and Hebron in that, Jerusalem in that direction and Hebron in that direction. It's right in the middle. And basically, they wanted to have a contiguous Jewish settlement between those two cities. So that way, if Jews wanted to go from one to the other, they would be able to safely drive through Jewish areas rather than through hostile Arab areas. And I'm not trying to be racist or anything like that, but at the time, the Arabs were hostile against the Jews. Yes, at the time, because things have changed since then. Peace is just rampant all over the place. I don't want to get into politics or sarcasm for that matter. Let's just keep on trucking. So, in 1943, JNF got some money together so they could reestablish a Jewish presence in the area. And they founded Kfar Etzion, the kibbutz Kfar Etzion. Shortly after that, they were joined by Masuot Yitzchak and by and Rosh Tzurim. Masuot Yitzchak and Rosh Tzurim, those were both religious settlements in addition to kibbutz Kfar Etzion, which was a religious settlement. So you had three religious settlements, and then there was a secular kibbutz that was founded called Rivadim that was also established. So you had four kibbutzim, four settlements that were in the area. Their primary difficulty was the terrain. Now, yes, you had the lone oak tree. You did. You had this lone oak tree. You had a couple of other trees here and there. So you did have vegetation. You had wild vegetation. But in terms of farming, it was really difficult because, I don't know if you can really see this so well in the video, but you can kind of see it. And by the base of this tree, there are these really big rocks. And that's the difficulty of farming in this whole area. The difficulty of agriculture in the whole area of Gush Etzion. You have these large rocks that every season get washed into the fields. And so every season when you want to plant, you have to move those rocks out of the way. What's a terrain? Terrain is the general makeup of the land in the area. Terrain is the kind of land that we have. So the terrain here is rocky, and in the winter it gets really cold. It gets bitter cold here in the winter time. Sometimes we have snow. We haven't seen snow here in a couple of years, but with the wacky weather that we've been having, who knows? Maybe we'll have snow this winter. We'll see. But it can snow here in the wintertime. You do get freezing rain. It gets really cold here. In the summertime, it gets blazing hot, especially like it has been this week, with temperatures going up to and even over 100 degrees here. So in that aspect, agriculture is difficult to begin with. And then you factor in all the rocks, the rocky terrain that we have here, the rocky mountains that are well, not the Rocky Mountains like in the States, but the rock-filled mountains that we have here in the area. And farming becomes more and more difficult. So the people here, the pioneers who moved in here in those four kibbutzim of Kfar Etzion, Masuot Yitzchak, Rosh Tzurim, and Rivadim, they had a lot of backbreaking labor that they had to go through in order to start planting things, but they were successful. These guys were successful starting in 1943 with Kfar Etzion, and then the other three joined in 46 and 47. The other three joined in one at a time. and they started to show progress. But again, if you look at the dates that I'm talking about, 45, 46, 47, again, it's bad timing, because November 29th, 1947, the United Nations meets in New York, and they decide that there's going to be a split between the Arabs of the area and the Jews of the area, and there will be two separate states. It was the first time that this was an official two-state solution, and it was immediately accepted by the Jews. David Ben-Gurion, who was the head of the provisional government of the Jews in the area, he immediately, with the support of his government, immediately accepted this two-state solution. This two-state solution was flatly rejected by all of the Arab countries, not by the Palestinians. A lot of times they talk about how the Palestinians rejected this term. If you want to really be technical about it, the Palestinians had no voice at this point. They weren't seen as a political entity at this point in time. In 1947, nobody thought to ask the Palestinians what they wanted. The people who rejected it were all the other countries around us, countries like Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, all the Saudi Arabia, all those other countries, most of which gained independence somewhere between the 20s and the 40s themselves. They're the ones who were deciding the fate of the Palestinians at that point. In any case, the decision was made in the United Nations on November 29th. It was accepted by the Jews, rejected by the Arabs. The next day, November 30th, 1947, was when the War of Independence broke out. It was originally a civil war. You had Palestinian Jews fighting against Palestinian Arabs. Those Palestinian Arabs were not alone, though. They actually had the financial and military support of the countries around them. That's why one of the most amazing things that happened during the War of Independence, I'm not going to go through the entire story now, but there's a story called the Night of the Bridges, where the Jews blew up all of the bridges leading into Mandatory Palestine. I thought the Palestinians didn't exist then, not until Arafat. No, the Palestinians definitely existed as a people. I'm basing this on my reading of a book called Palestinian Identity by a known Palestinian historian named Rashid Khalidi. He basically says that as a group, as an entity, the Palestinians really came into their own around the 1920s. That's when they started to see themselves as distinct from Jordanian, distinct from Lebanese, distinct from Egyptian, and most importantly, distinct from Syrians. Up until then, most of them considered themselves to be part of Greater Syria. But it was around the 1920s when they started to see themselves as a distinct political entity. But again, this is going a little bit off topic. But like I said, in 1947, when the decision was made in the United Nations, nobody thought, there was no real leader of the Palestinians to speak to or to speak for the Palestinian people. So it was all the Arab countries around them that basically decided their fate. Yasser Arafat basically declared himself as the first leader of the Palestinian people, the first official leader of the Palestinian people, and that's a story for another time. We're not gonna get into his decisions and his impact on world politics. But in any case, the first part of the Civil War, the first part of the War of Independence, I should say, was the Civil War: Jewish Palestinians versus Arab Palestinians. Because there was no Israel yet, it was still Mandatory Palestine, and you had Jews fighting against Arabs, and anyone who lived here was known as Palestinian. So they were fighting against each other, but they had help. The local Arabs had help from foreign armies, which the Jews did not. Yes, we had help of individuals, and there are some amazing stories of Jews coming from overseas, from the United States, from Europe, coming here to help the fledgling Jewish state, or the not even yet born Jewish state, trying to help its birth happen. But it wasn't on a large scale like the Arabs had from their local brethren that were around that surrounded Israel and was supplying them. Surrounded Palestine and was surrounding the local Arab Palestinians with whatever they needed. The area here of Gush Etzion, like I said, it's equidistant between Jerusalem and Hebron, but it wasn't so easy to get supplies here. It wasn't the contiguous line of settlement that we had hoped for, because we were just starting to build it when the war had broken out. So it was still difficult to get supplies to and from Gush Etzion. And as time went on in 1947, throughout the war, various convoys were sent from Jerusalem to Gush Etzion. Unfortunately, those convoys were repeatedly attacked, and things became more and more dire. The situation became more and more dire for the residents here in Gush Etzion. Eventually, they decided, I believe this was in January of 1948, they decided that they were going to evacuate any non-combatants, any women and children that were not fighting. Well, none of the children were fighting, but there were some women who did stay to fight. But so any children and any women who weren't fighting were evacuated to Jerusalem. They went to stay in the Ratisbon Monastery in Jerusalem. For those of you who know Jerusalem well, it's on Rehov Shmuel Hanagid Street, right next to the what's that shul? There's a synagogue there. I forget the name of it. There's a relatively large synagogue there. It's about a half a block away from the Sheridan, about a block away from the Great Synagogue. But there's a monastery like just hidden right in the back there called the Ratisbon Monastery, and that's where these non-combatants from Gush Etzion stayed when they were evacuated from here. The fighting here became pretty desperate because, as I said, it was difficult to get supplies here, and our enemies had a lot of supplies being supplied primarily from Jordan, which is not that far away from here. It came to a head on May 13th, 1948, when actual Jordanian soldiers, even though it was still a civil war, technically speaking, Jordan wasn't supposed to be sending in soldiers at all. Soldiers from the Jordanian Legion helped out local Arabs in destroying Kfar Etzion. Something like 95 to 98% of the fighters were killed during that battle, and a lot of those were after they had surrendered. They knew that the fight was just unwinnable, and they had surrendered, and the Jordanians massacred them anyway. There's a small Russian Orthodox monastery that was built not far from here, and the fighters were using that as their headquarters. And when they finally had surrendered, the Jordanians ordered those that had surrendered to show them where there were other soldiers that were left, that were hiding. And they brought these soldiers who had surrendered, brought the Jordanians to the Russian Orthodox monastery and showed them the bunker where there were some soldiers, primarily soldiers that were wounded, that were being tended to by doctors and nurses. And the Jordanians threw a series of grenades into the bunker, killing all those people, as I said, post-surrender. The following day, May 14th, 1948, the rest of the kibbutzim in the area, that was when Kfar Etzion was destroyed, but the rest of the other three surrendered the following day on May 14th, 1948. And here's the answer to the trivia question. At the very moment, almost to the minute, that David Ben-Gurion was declaring the State of Israel. It's a little bit of a trick question. A lot of people think that the State of Israel was declared on May 15th, 1948. But it's actually not true. It was declared a day before May 15th because May 15th was a Shabbat. And even though David Ben-Gurion was not by any stretch of the imagination a religious man, he still understood the historic implications of establishing a Jewish state. And he knew that it was going to be happening over the radio because he wanted it over the radio. He wanted to broadcast it to the world. And so he did, but he could not bring himself to be so hypocritical as to declare a Jewish state on Shabbat over the radio. He said, that's something I'm not going to do. So even though the British officially left on May 15th, on Shabbat, May 15th, 1948, the official declaration of the State of Israel was the day before, on Friday afternoon, on May 14th, 1948, at the very same time that the last remnants of Gush Etzion, of the area of the Gush, fell to the Arab forces. Now, this tree was at the heart of all of those four settlements. Kfar Etzion is a little bit up the block that way. Rosh Tzurim was over there. Revadim was in that direction. But this tree was literally and figuratively the heart of those four settlements. And what a lot of the children who lived here at the time, those who were, as I mentioned, relocated to the Ratisbon Monastery, they fondly remembered playing in underneath and around this tree, climbing in the tree. Because, like I said, there weren't that many trees here. The Jordanians, excuse me, the Turks had cut down almost all the trees. This was the only one left. So they had fond memories of the one tree that they could remember playing on. After the War of Independence was over in 1949, the surviving members of all of the kibbutzim were relocated to places like Haifa. The survivors of Kfar Etzion were relocated to Haifa. The other kibbutzim, the survivors of the other kibbutzim, relocated the actual kibbutzim elsewhere in the country. So there's actually a Masot Yitzchak and Revadim elsewhere in Israel. They reestablished them within the borders of what was then the state of Israel. But as I said, they remembered fondly this tree, and they would go to a hilltop in Jerusalem, and you can actually see, you can't see it from there, but if you stand over here looking in this direction, you can see the hills of Jerusalem. So they would stand on those hills of Jerusalem over there, and they would look fondly over here at this oak tree and think, my God, we had such a great time there. It's such a shame that we can't be there anymore. In 1967, I'm not going to go through the whole history of the Six-Day War. Maybe I'll do that on another time. We'll go to Ammunition Hill, and I'll tell the story of the Six-Day War from Ammunition Hill. It's a really good story. Let me try to block that little bit of sun poking through the tree there. I can't block it. I'm not tall enough. But in any case, in 1967, we fought the Six-Day War, and we actually didn't want to fight the Jordanians. We told the king of Jordan to keep out of it because this had nothing to do with him. But he didn't want to keep out of it for various reasons. And we ended up fighting against him, and we ended up capturing this territory. I told this on the very first episode of the Stories Outside Your Door. I told the story of Shlomo Goren about how he went down to Hebron and helped conquer the city of Hebron single-handedly. Not helped, but he conquered it single-handedly. But the night before, he was camped out here in Gush Etzion, where all the soldiers were preparing for the attack the following day. This area was captured, as I said, on the same day as Jerusalem in the Six-Day War. Shortly after the war was over, the residents who had lived here before, the kids who had lived there before, now 20 years later, they came to the Israeli government and they said, can we please go back to our homes? Got a couple of soldiers taking a tour here, just going behind me, which is awesome, of course. The residents came and they said to the Israeli government, we want to go back, and we want to go and live where we lived once before. And a lot of politics, I'm not going to go into the details of it, but they finally got permission to come back here. And the very first town that they built was a town that's right over here behind the camera, and it's called Alon Shvut. Alon Shvut in Hebrew literally means a return to the oak, because this oak tree basically was a symbol of home. It was a symbol of home. It was a symbol of comfort. It was a symbol of things that as they once were. And if you want to take that from the Jewish perspective, obviously it's the story that I was just telling, but you could even take it from the Arab perspective and talk about the idea that this 600 or 650-year-old tree represents things the way that they were back in the day, 650 years ago, when whatever important thing happened when this tree was planted happened. But in any case, this tree symbolizes what was. And the fact that it's a tree, and the fact that it's not alone anymore. If I turn the camera around, you'd see uncountable numbers of trees around us. That, in my opinion, is really indicative of the story of the Jewish people returning to Israel. It's not just like ruins and remnants of what was. There's life all around it. It's a return to the source of life. It's a return to our very essence, and it's a return to our strength as a nation. And there's nothing better to symbolize that kind of return than a tree, a mighty oak tree, no less, with strong, deep roots and beautiful leaves up above. It's a really good metaphor for the return of the Jewish people, and that's why I think it's great that the very first town that was built in the area after 1967 was called Alon Shvut, a return to the oak. I actually don't live in Alon Shvut. I live not far from there. I live in a place called Efrat, but luckily for me, it is still within the boundaries of Gush Etzion. It's in the area of Gush Etzion. So even though my town's name isn't directly linked to this tree, it's still part of it's still part of my home, and my return to it is yet another return to that oak. So I'm happy to be a part of that. Um, got a little bit nationalistic at the end there. Didn't plan that. I just wanted to tell the story of a tree, but I'm happy that it took that kind of a turn, and I'm happy that I finally got to tell the story. I've been wanting to tell the story since I started this series. I've always wanted to tell the story of the lone oak tree. I'm happy that I got to do it. Let me know. Let me know if you guys are interested in going on a tour to hear stories like this about the oak tree, stories that are also local, stories that are not local. I can go other places in the country as well. I've taken clients the length and breadth of the country. And I love nationalistic Andrew. I love the fact that Andrew is so nationalistic from the States, and I can't wait until he's nationalistic from his home. We'll get there. I know that it's not so easy, but we'll get there. Anyways, give me a call. Let me know if you guys want to go on a tour by yourselves while your kids are in school, or with your kids when they're not in school for that particular day. I can take adults on tours. I can take kids on tours. I can take adults and kids on tours. I've done it all, and I can do it all, and I will do it all. So you just let me know what it is you want, what tour you want to set up, and I'll be happy to take care of it. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week on the next episode of The Stories Right Outside Your Door.